9 men dressed in dusty robes knelt before Baldwin II, king of Jerusalem, in a hall whose stones still smelled of fresh mortar, and asked for permission to protect with their own lives all the roads leading to the holy city, armed only with their faith, their swords, and an oath that would resonate for 8 centuries. It was the year 1119 when Hugues de Payan, a knight from Champagne, whose sun-baked face bore the scars of one who had seen too many pilgrim caravans torn apart on the roads, pronounced that impossible vow. Beside him were Godfrey of Saint-Omer, André de Montbard, uncle of the young Bernard of Clairvaux, and 6 more companions whose names history has preserved with unequal reverence. The king, seated on a throne that had not yet learned the security that time grants, must have looked at those 9 warriors with a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. 9 men to protect hundreds of kilometers of desert routes infested, but added something that would change history. He offered them residence in the east wing of his palace, built over the ruins of Solomon's temple. Those 9 knights settled in the underground stables, vast stone chambers that sank into the living rock of the Temple Mount. For 9 full years, they accepted no new members. For 9 years, according to official chronicles, they patrolled the roads. But there is another detail that the chroniclers barely mention and that later archaeologists would confirm. In those stables, they dug. They drilled into the rock. They descended to levels that no Christian had explored since the destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans in the year 70 of our era. What were they really looking for beneath the stones of Jerusalem? The context of their birth is fundamental to understanding what would become one of the most powerful organizations in medieval history. Europe had just launched the First Crusade, a torrent of faith, violence, and ambition that had claimed Jerusalem from Islamic control in the year 1099. The Crusader states were fragile, Christian islands in a Muslim sea, and pilgrims traveling from the ports of Jaffa and Acre to the Holy City regularly died in ambushes. The need for protection was real. But 9 men, no matter how skilled, could not cover that need, unless their true mission was another. Europe in those first decades of the 12th century was boiling with new energy. Trade was beginning to revive cities. Cathedrals started to rise with techniques that seemed to defy the known laws of gravity. There was a hunger for ancient knowledge, lost texts, secrets that the Islamic world had preserved while Europe trembled in its fortified castles. And there, beneath the Temple Mount, in chambers that had remained, sealed for centuries, those 9 knights excavated in the darkness by torchlight that cast dancing shadows over inscriptions in ancient Hebrew that they perhaps could not read but certainly copied. In the year 1128, Hugues de Payan left Jerusalem and traveled to Europe. He did not come as just any knight. He came backed by letters from the king of Jerusalem and, more importantly, by his nephew André de Montbard, whose family tie with Bernard of Clairvaux would open doors that no ordinary warrior could pass through. Bernard, the abbot of Clairvaux, was at that time the most influential voice of Christendom after the Pope. His eloquence had mobilized kings, his interpretation of faith reformed monasteries, and when Hugues de Payan knelt before him and explained the vision of his order, Bernard listened with an intensity that would transform history.
What exactly did Hugues say to Bernard in that private meeting? What we know is that Bernard wrote a treatise that would forever legitimize the fusion of war and holiness, De Laude Novae Militiae, in praise of the new knighthood. In that revolutionary text, Bernard argued that killing in defense of faith was not a sin, but an act of purification, that the warrior monk was superior both to the contemplative monk and the secular knight, that these new soldiers of Christ practiced a type of death that benefited both the one who died and the one who killed. It was a radical theological transformation, and it worked.
In the year 1129, at the Council of Troyes, Pope Honorius II officially recognized the poor Knights of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. He granted them their own monastic rule, largely written by Bernard himself. They were to live in chastity, poverty, and obedience. They were to pray at canonical hours. They were to wear white tunics, the color of purity, with a red cross over the heart. And crucially, they answered only to the Pope, not to any king or bishop. They were an international, transnational, autonomous order, the prototype of something the medieval world had not seen before, a multinational corporation under divine protection. Their growth was explosive. What began with 9 men in underground stables became thousands of knights, sergeants, squires, and servants spread throughout Europe and the Holy Land. Nobles from all nations donated lands, castles, money. Dying was easy in the Crusades, and many warriors preferred to bequeath their properties to an eternal order rather than to heirs they might never see again. The Templars accepted everything: vineyards in Burgundy, ports in La Rochelle, fortresses in Spain, farms in England. In a single generation, they became one of the largest landowners in Europe. But their true heyday began when they understood something that neither kings nor bishops had fully grasped: that money could move faster than armies, that trust was worth more than gold, and that whoever controlled the flows of wealth controlled the real power of the West. Imagine a scene in Paris around the year 1200. A merchant enters the house of the Temple, the Templar fortress located in the Marais. The walls are thick, the doors guarded by warriors with swords that have tasted blood in Acre and Ascalon. The merchant carries a heavy bag of silver coins. He needs to travel to Jerusalem, but carrying that weight in gold or silver is an invitation to murder in any forest between here and the Mediterranean. The Templar who receives him, a man with calloused hands who can both calculate interest and behead infidels, weighs the coins, notes the amount in a ledger with impeccable handwriting, and gives the merchant an encrypted document with symbols that only another Templar can decipher. The merchant travels light. He arrives in Jerusalem, enters the Templar fortress next to the ancient temple, presents the document, receives his money, less a commission. Simple, revolutionary. The Templars had just invented the bank check. They did not call it that, of course, but the system was identical: deposits in one city, withdrawals in another, a network of trust backed by impregnable fortresses and warriors unafraid of death. Soon, entire kings used Templar services. Philip II, Augustus of France, deposited the royal treasury in the Temple of Paris. Richard the Lionheart financed his crusades through Templar loans. The order became the central bank of Europe before that concept even existed. In the Holy Land, their military power reached legendary heights. They built castles that still astonish with their engineering: Crac des Chevaliers in Syria, which could house 2,000 men and withstand sieges lasting months; the Pilgrim Castle on the Israeli coast, surrounded by walls so thick that Muslim catapults bounced projectiles without causing damage. Their knights were the vanguard in every major battle. Rectal. Montgisard. In the year 1177, 80 Templars charged alongside Baldwin IV, the leper king whose face covered by a silver mask hid the rotten flesh but not his tactical genius, against an army of Saladin that outnumbered them 20-1. They won. The Muslims learned to fear the white tunics with the red cross.
The Grand Master of the order in those years was Odo de Saint-Amand, a man whose ferocity was legendary even among warriors accustomed to brutality. Captured after the Battle of Marj Ayoun, Saladin offered to exchange him for a high-ranking Muslim emir. Odo replied from his cell that a Templar could never be ransomed, that he preferred to die in captivity. And he died there, chained, unyielding. That was the temper that forged the order: absolute, relentless, willing to die, but never to retreat.
However, their knowledge went far beyond war. In the libraries of their fortresses, they accumulated texts, manuscripts into either Arabic, Hebrew, Greek, Syriac. While Europe burned books considered heretical, the Templars collected them. They translated treatises of Islamic mathematics, studied Jewish astronomy, copied Gnostic texts that the Church had condemned centuries earlier. Why? Simple intellectual curiosity? Or were they searching for something specific, some knowledge that justified those initial excavations beneath the Temple Mount? Their constructions reveal architectural mastery that surprises modern engineers. The Templar chapels scattered throughout Europe, the Temple in London, Tomar in Portugal, Laon in France, share specific geometric proportions. Many are octagonal, a shape that replicates the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. But the octagon has deeper meanings. In sacred geometry, it represents the transition between the earthly square and the celestial circle, between matter and spirit. The measurements of these chapels incorporate mathematical ratios, the golden ratio, Pythagorean, relationships that should not be found in buildings constructed by illiterate warriors. They guarded relics. The true cross traveled with them to battle. Fragments of saints' bones, but also more enigmatic objects, unidentified skulls, chests whose contents were never publicly recorded, silver receptacles transported under permanent guard, but whose exact nature no external chronicler documented. In the Templar archives confiscated in the year 1307, inquisitors would find references to treasures that were neither gold nor silver, documents, heretical texts, knowledge that threatened official doctrines. They invented signaling systems that allowed rapid communication between fortresses separated by hundreds of kilometers, developed ciphers for their messages that modern cryptographers have tried to decode with partial results. Their fleets navigated the Mediterranean with nautical charts more precise than those available to other Christian navigators. Some suggest they reached America 2 centuries before Columbus, based on symbols carved into rocks in Nova Scotia that could, the word could doing all the work here, be Templar signs. The evidence is weak, but the capability was there. Today, when we enter a bank and deposit money in one branch to withdraw it in another city, we are using a Templar system. When you sign a check, you are using an innovation they perfected. The concept of an international corporation with autonomous but coordinated branches. Templar. The idea that an organization can be more enduring and powerful than any individual king. They proved it. But here arises the mystery that no one has satisfactorily solved in 700 years. What did they really find beneath Solomon's temple during those first 9 years? The question is not whimsical. The later behavior of the order suggests they possessed something, knowledge, objects, texts, that gave them the confidence to negotiate on equal terms with popes and kings. Archaeological excavations carried out in the 19th century beneath the Temple Mount by the British Palestine Foundation found Templar tunnels that descended deep into the rock, tunnels that ventured under the exact location of the ancient Holy of Holies of Solomon's Temple. They found Templar artifacts, a cross, a spur, remains of excavation tools. But the tunnels were empty. If there was something, the Templars had taken it centuries earlier. Theories abound. Some say they found the Ark of the Covenant hidden by Jewish priests before the Roman destruction. Others suggest they found apocryphal gospels that contradicted the official narrative of Christ. Some propose that they discovered evidence that Jesus had survived the crucifixion or had descendants, or that the resurrection was symbolic rather than literal. More esoteric theories involve knowledge from Egyptian priests, Atlantean wisdom, lost technologies, the concrete. Evidence is this. The Templars went from 9 poor knights to bankers of kings in less than 2 generations. They had the confidence to challenge theological conventions, as when they refused to pay tithes to local bishops, arguing their direct dependence on the Pope. They maintained cordial relationships with Muslim and Jewish scholars in the Holy Land, something unusual for crusaders. And in their internal rituals, according to confessions extracted under torture, always a suspicious source, there were elements the Church would consider blasphemous. What do you believe? Did they find something physical beneath the temple, or did they simply build a legend so powerful that no one dared challenge it? Leave us your theory in the comments. By the year 1291, the Holy Land was lost. Acre, the last great Crusader fortress, fell to the Mamluks in a battle so brutal that Muslim chroniclers, accustomed to violence, wrote with horror about rivers of blood literally running through the streets. Grandmaster Guillaume de Beaujeu died defending the walls, an arrow lodged beneath his arm where the armor joined the breastplate. The Templars evacuated to Cyprus, where they established their new headquarters. But the original purpose of the order, to defend the Holy Land, had disappeared, and with that purpose, the justification for their existence also vanished. In Europe, public opinion began to turn. The Crusades had failed. The Templars were immensely rich while peasants starved. Their fiscal privileges irritated bishops who saw fortunes flowing into impregnable coffers without paying taxes. Kings, perpetually indebted, looked on with envy and resentment at an organization that lent them money and possessed fortresses within their own realms that they technically did not control.
Philip IV of France, called the Fair for his symmetrical and cold as marble face, had a problem. He was bankrupt. His wars against England and Flanders had emptied the treasury. He had already expelled the Jews and confiscated their assets. He had devalued the currency to provoke revolts. The Templars had loaned him enormous sums. The Temple of Paris guarded deposits equivalent to trillions in modern currency. And technically, the king could not touch them.
Unless the Templars were heretics. Philip was the grandson of Louis IX, the holy king canonized by the Church. But where Louis had been pious to the point of naivety, Philip was political to the marrow. Alongside his advisor, Guillaume de Nogaret, a man whose family had been destroyed by the Inquisition for Cathar heresy, which perhaps explains his ease in using heresy accusations as a political weapon, he devised a plan of millimetric precision. First, he planted spies among the Templars. He used confessions from discontented members, some genuine, others probably fabricated. He built a file of accusations that the Templars denied Christ during secret, initiation ceremonies, that they spat on the cross, that they worshipped an idol called Baphomet, that they practiced ritual sodomy, that Templar priests did not properly consecrate the host. Some of these accusations might have twisted cores of truth. It is possible that initiation rituals included psychological tests where the initiate was ordered to verbally deny Christ to prove absolute obedience to the order above all, a loyalty test that mimicked Roman persecutions where Christians had to choose between denying their faith or dying. It is possible they venerated relics in ways that seemed idolatrous to outsiders. It is possible that the forced proximity of celibate men in isolated fortresses produced exactly what human nature suggests. But Philip was not seeking truth. He sought destruction. On the night of October the 12th, 1307, messengers galloped across France delivering sealed orders to all royal seneschals. The orders were not to be opened until dawn the next day. On October the 13th, a Friday, a detail forever engraved in Western superstition, royal troops simultaneously moved against all Templar houses in France. They struck doors at dawn, arrested knights who were sleeping, praying matins, having breakfast in refectories. The timing was nearly perfect. Jacques de Molay, Grand Master of the Order, was captured in the Temple of Paris. He was nearly 70 years old. He had spent 46 years in the Order. He had fought in Acre. He was a warrior, not a politician, and did not understand the game that Philip and Nogaret were playing. When shown the accusations, he responded with genuine indignation that the order was pure, served Christ, and that the charges were absurd. Then the interrogations began. We must be careful here. Confessions extracted under torture are corrupted evidence. The rack that dislocates joints, the boots that crush foot bones into dust, water forced down the throat until the lungs feel filled with ocean. These techniques produce the words the torturer wants to hear, not necessarily the truth. 138 Templars confessed in Paris. They admitted to denying Christ, admitted to spitting on the cross, admitted to worshiping a bearded skull. Days later, many retracted. They said they had lied under torture. But in the canon law of the time, retracting a confession of heresy was proof of relapsed heresy, punishable by death at the stake. The trial dragged on for years. Philip pressured Pope Clement V, a weak pontiff installed in Avignon under French influence, to dissolve the order. Clement initially resisted. There was evidence that other Templar branches, especially in Spain, England, and Portugal, did not show the alleged corruptions, but finally yielded.
In the year 1312, at the Council of Vienne, the Order of the Temple was officially suppressed. Not condemned, note, suppressed by apostolic provision, a legal distinction that essentially admitted there was insufficient evidence, but that political necessity required their elimination. In March of 1314, on a wooden platform erected on the Ile de la Cité in Paris, in front of Notre Dame Cathedral, 4 Templar leaders were publicly displayed. Among them were Jacques de Molay and Geoffroy de Charnay, preceptor of Normandy. They were expected to publicly confirm their confessions, admit the heresy of the order, die as penitents.
Instead, before the crowd, Jacques de Molay stood tall. His voice, weakened by years of imprisonment, still carried authority. He declared that the order was innocent, that the confessions had been lies forced by torture, that he was guilty only of cowardice for having lied, that he died absolving himself before God. Philip, watching from a window of the royal palace, immediately ordered them to be burned that same night. There would be no time for the Pope to intervene or public opinion to sympathize. On an island in the Seine, an improvised pyre was erected. De Molay and de Charnay were tied to posts. The flames rose. Chronicles say that de Molay, as the fire consumed his flesh, shouted a curse, that both the Pope and the King would appear before God's tribunal within the year. Clement V died a month later, in April, of intestinal illness. Philip IV died in November, of a hunting accident or a stroke, depending on the source. Within the year, both. Coincidence, skeptics would say. Prophecy, believers would say. But the psychological effect was undeniable. The dying Templar's curse entered European folklore as a warning against injustice. But here's the real mystery. Where was the treasure? When royal troops stormed the Temple of Paris, they found archives, furniture, chapels, armories. But the vaults were nearly empty. Some silver, debt documents, nothing comparable to the legendary wealth of the order. The Templar, fleet anchored in La Rochelle, had disappeared days before the mass arrest. 18 galleys put to sea on the night of October the 11th and were never seen again by French authorities. Theories about the fate of that fleet and its cargo fill libraries. Some say they sailed to Scotland, where King Robert the Bruce, excommunicated and at war with England, would welcome anyone Philip pursued. There are Scottish Masonic traditions claiming descent from refugee Templars. Others suggest Portugal, where King Denis transformed the local order into the Order of Christ, which kept the same rules, castles, even emblem with slight modifications. Vasco da Gama would sail under the sails of the Order of Christ. Portuguese discoveries would have financing and navigators trained in Templar traditions. Some search for the buried treasure in Rennes-le-Château, on Oak Island in Canada, in caves beneath Scottish castles, in wells sealed beneath ancient commanderies. Each generation has its seekers. None have found anything definitive. But perhaps the treasure was not gold.
The Templars knew arrest was possible. They had an intelligence network. They had moved the fleet before the strike. If their true treasure were precious metals, they would have better protected the vaults. What if the treasure was knowledge? Documents that proved something the Church could not allow to be known. Texts copied from Jerusalem libraries. Gospels that contradicted dogmas. Records of excavations beneath the temple. Maps of lands that officially did not exist.
Knowledge can be copied, it can be dispersed, it can be hidden in symbols carved in stone, in architectural proportions, in rituals transmitted orally. It does not need vaults, it needs silence and patience. If you carry some metal in your pocket, coins, a credit card, you carry the Templar legacy. The modern banking system is a direct descendant of their innovations. The London Stock Exchange began in a building that had been Templar property. Maritime insurance derives from contracts they developed to protect goods in transit. If you have seen a movie about secret societies, about conspiracies spanning centuries, about organizations operating in shadows manipulating events, the template comes from the Templars. Dan Brown did not invent the Templar mystery. He packaged it for the mass market. But the fascination is genuine and much older. Templar symbols appear on dollar bills, on national shields, on corporate logos. The pate cross they wore appears in modern military orders, in decorations, in emblems. Portugal sailed the world under their cross. Malta owes its identity to the Hospitaller Knights who absorbed Templar resources. Modern initiatic societies, Freemasonry most notably, claim spiritual continuity with the Templars. Whether those connections are historically verifiable is a topic of eternal debate between academic historians and esoteric traditions. But the EOS cultural influence is undeniable. The knight who is also a monk, the warrior who is also a mystic, the man of action who possesses secret knowledge. That archetype dominates our fiction, our games, our fantasies of power and purpose. Every Friday the 13th, although few know it, unknowingly commemorates the fall of the Templars. The superstition around that date, weak in folklore evidence before the 20th century but powerful in modern popular culture, traces back, according to some, to that dawn in October of 1307. And the questions the Templars left unanswered continue to germinate. Every decade brings new excavations, new books, new theories. Archaeologists dig beneath ancient commanderies. Researchers petition the Vatican to open sealed archives. Divers explore Scottish coasts seeking remains of 14th-century galleys. No one has found definitive answers. Perhaps that is precisely the legacy they intended, not a treasure that can be exhausted, but a mystery that continues to generate search, questioning, wonder at what human power can achieve when faith, organization, and secrecy combine. Think of the stones of the Templar chapels that still stand after 800 years. Stones cut with millimetric precision, assembled without mortar in some cases, oriented according to specific constellations. The stonemasons who carved them have been dead for centuries. The knights who consecrated them are dust. But the stones remain, and the geometric proportions encoded in their measurements can still be calculated, studied, debated. Did they know something we have forgotten? Or were they simply men of their time, brutal warriors whom legend has idealized beyond recognition? The answer is probably somewhere between both extremes. They were men, ambitious, violent when necessary, capable of everyday cruelty that chronicles do not record because it was normal for the time. But they were also something more. An organization that transcended the limitations of its time, that imagined structures of power beyond feudal borders, that accumulated knowledge from three civilizations, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, when ignorance fortified the norm. Their greatest achievement was neither military nor financial. It was conceptual. They demonstrated that an organization dedicated to an ideal, properly structured, could survive individual kings, adapt to changing circumstances, operate transnationally. They lost in the end, yes. Philip and Clement destroyed them. But the organizational form they perfected, the international corporation with autonomous branches, clear hierarchy, internal secrets, and transcendent mission, that form survived and dominates our modern world in ways we do not always recognize. Every multinational corporation with a central headquarters, regional branches, internal corporate culture, and proprietary knowledge guarded jealously is using a model the Templars perfected when the very concept was unimaginable. Every organization that answers to a higher authority rather than a local government, that maintains internal rituals, that recruits through initiation, follows Templar patterns. And every time someone deposits money in a bank, trusting that they can withdraw it elsewhere, they are participating in an institutional trust system that 9 knights in an underground stable in Jerusalem helped create. But let us return to that question that no one has satisfactorily answered. What did they take from those tunnels beneath the Temple Mount? More than 800 years have passed since they dug there. Generations of seekers have invested fortunes trying to solve that mystery. And perhaps, just perhaps, the true Templar treasure is not what they found, but the fact that they keep making us search. That centuries after their official destruction, they still exert enough fascination for us to devote time, resources, and imagination to unravel their secrets. That, in itself, is a kind of immortality. So here we stand, like those 9 knights so long ago, before something greater than ourselves, something whose full dimensions we cannot see, only sense. They knelt before a king and asked for something impossible. We stand before their legacy and ask the same question each generation has asked. What did they know that we do not? What did they find that justified everything that came after? And what if they never found anything beneath the temple, but understood that the mystery itself is more powerful than any physical relic could be?